Really excited to introduce this final session of the day before we close and break for lunch. I have with us Roger Hattam, who is Chief Commercial Officer of Triodos Bank UK, who will be sharing with us first, and then Ray Coyle, CEO of Energise Africa. So Triodos Bank is the UK's leading sustainable bank that lends to businesses that care for people and planet, and last year alone financed 562 sustainable energy projects. What I love about Triodos is the transparency with which they talk about what they do and their investments. And really excited to hear what Roger has to share with us. And delighted to be working with Ray again and hearing some of the stories from Energise Africa, which mobilises millions of pounds to cut carbon emissions and improve lives through clean energy access projects in sub-Saharan Africa. So we build this session as stories of real economy climate impacts, looking at greener banking and investing and direct investment. And I hope, will be a really inspiring session getting into some of the stories and case studies of what climate impact investing can look like. So I'll hand over to Roger and let you introduce yourself if you'd like.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me clearly. I don't normally have a problem with voice projection, so please do shout if you can't. I stand here, I guess, today as part representative of Triodos, as has already been said, but also committed Christian. I've spent my life both in finance and a series of social enterprises, including some sub-Saharan solar, and trustees of organisations like Christians Against Poverty. And through that, I guess I've become convinced of the power of the local church to transform its society and be a prophetic voice in wider global communities. And I guess when we think about the church, we often think about worship, mission and care for our communities, and rightly so. But stewardship means managing our budgets and preserving capital and fundraising and so on. But I believe Jesus pushes us further than this. It's not just about what we're giving our money to, but it's what our money is doing while we're not looking. And Jesus' teaching is very clear in terms of the impact of money and the lack of neutrality that it has. It competes for our heart. It's not neutral. It's always having an impact. And we are stewards, not owners of our own money. And so I think we might be used to interpreting that message from the pulpit in our individual lives, but I don't think it's a theological stretch to suggest that it also applies to our corporate and society lives as well. And nor do I think it's a big theological stretch to suggest that when Paul is talking about principalities and powers, he's talking about the endemic structures of society and the things that support that. And money is very clearly one of those things. So for Jesus, money isn't a practical necessity; it's a spiritual force in its own right, which shapes our priorities, our community, and ultimately our witness. But there's the rub. Because our mission might be saying something, but our money doing something else. And so I guess the way that we're using our money when we're not looking as a field for me is a tool through which the kingdom itself can be expressed, which brings us to ethical banking. Perhaps my first slide, I should move on. Because, as I've said, every pound we hold, every deposit we make, every investment we choose is shaped is shaping the world in some way. And so obviously from a Christian perspective, but also from Triodos's ethics and roots, we're always looking for a way in which we can support to fund the kind of society and world that we want to see, and also to change the financial infrastructure that sits in the organisation. So we have an expression of we want to finance change and change finance. Sadly, next slide, I'll have to do the Boris Johnson next slide thing as we go. But sadly, only yesterday there was a major report out for Banking on Climate Chaos, which reported that the thick end of $1 trillion was funded by our major banks around the globe into unsustainable fossil fuels for the next year. That's adding to the trillions already built since the Climate Accord. And unfortunately, that's not even a deceleration. That's about a 4 or 5% increase in funding that is going on. And banks are sadly profiting from a lot of areas of deforestation and so on. You can read all of the reports for yourself. But this is not designed to be a negative thing. We all know the bad news. It's designed to be a positive thing. And so how does Triodos and Triodos's business model work with that? Well, on the left-hand side, I'm sorry if this is a little bit small, but the light green blobs are depositors, generally. Could be either personal consumers or small businesses and charities who will invest with us their savings and investments. In the Netherlands, a little bit of donated funds. We have a subsidiary charity called the Triodos Foundation. And we put that money to work specifically into loans, into our investment funds, and to some extent to support, in a more patient capital way, donations to things which might provide pump priming of otherwise unfinanceable work. And on the right-hand side, we took is how we deploy that. So at Triodos, we've summarized our the kind of world we want to see into 5 key transitions, which are resource transition, which is really about how we build more into our circular economy and resource management. The energy transmission, which is how we bring about a fossil fuel-free world. Got there in the end. But more broadly, rather than it being just about climate, we're looking at some other transitions. So we have what we call a well-being transition, which is focused on people's overall well-being and health and so on. A societal transition, which is investing in communities, social housing, churches, charities, faith groups, and the like. And finally, the food transition, which is really about how are we building sustainable food systems through organic farming, through nature restoration, and the like. So that is our business model on a page and how we go about deploying our cash. And all of our cash will go into one of those kind of broad themes. Let's bring that to life a little bit in terms of our UK-only impact in 2025. You can see how that plays through in terms of carbon avoided or captured through things like organic meals and social housing and the like. And the wider group, we operate in Spain and the Netherlands and Belgium as well. So more widely, we have a greater impact. We also have a investment management fund, which for those of you that know your classification of funds is what we call an Article 9 fund. So it's the highest and most aligned fund in terms of the, this happens to be the way that European funds are classified. And we are fully transparent in every investment that we make around the globe, which ranges from everything to, you'll see some stuff on the West Coast, which is looking at things like cybercrime and avoiding cybercrime on the one hand, through to some of the things in sub-Saharan Africa, which is about supporting farming models or microfinance or similar things elsewhere. I'm sure a theme that we'll hear from in a minute as well. And then more locally, we try and invest always in the real economy and real impact. We don't do any fancy casino banking, investment trading, any of that kind of activity. And again, if you go onto our website, you can click on every single one of our customers and find out why we have lent to them and what the nature of the deal and so on is. So let's bring some of those to life in the next one. So energy security, Thrive Renewables, which is head office is 160 yards in that direction. Real focus on community-based energy. So how does the community get something out of the renewable energy? And I think it's very pertinent to the last conversation we were having, where sometimes politicians and communities they think net zero is a middle-class luxury, not something which positively impacts on their life. And Thrive, just come from this morning from a project in Lawrence Weston, which is a community out to the west of Bristol, where they have got a community-owned wind blade, a single blade, which is funding a local community, the crowding in of additional resources into the community, which is then being reinvested in improving housing stock, improving the insulation and so on, and creating real tangible benefit for communities who can now pay their bills at the end of the month. The community centre they've built acts as a local hub. So real grassroots, local impact in terms of that. So I see that as the real win-win of this kind of thing, because it's powering equivalent of 3,000 homes in the one blade, but it's also having a much wider impact in that community. And perhaps next slide, in the interest of time, social care. Last week I was up in Blackpool. We have a client who we've lent 20-something million pounds to, called Therapeutic Care. It is a tragedy of our society that they get over 1,500 referrals a month for children who are unable to live with their parents for whatever reason, or have been thrown out of their homes, and their choice is a bus shelter or not. And he runs a Therapeutic Care on a high quality, high investment in getting people and young children back on their feet. One of the clients that they had, one of the children that they had before Christmas, had been kept quite literally in the dog kennel by their family for their whole lives until he was 8 years old. They actually physically had to teach that child how not to walk around on their hands and knees on the floor, and to teach them how to stand up and walk. So tragic situations that some of these kids are leaving, but they're coming to organisations like Therapeutic Care. Ruskin Mill Trust operates on a similar basis in terms of providing high quality care or education or therapy to young people. Next slide. We also work actively in the faith sector. This is Jubilee Church in Hull, who we funded an extension and refurbishment of their church building. They operate from that whole bunch of impact in their local communities, working with things like Transforming Lives for Good, debt centres, food banks and the like, in really bringing that life to mean something valuable to the community. And small plug, if anybody's ever wanting any finance for that kind of thing, please do come and see if it's something that we could help you support. Next one. Cafe Direct, many of you will have come across their coffee. Their mission is to bring a higher standard of remuneration to the actual farmers who are doing the actual work of creating coffee in the first place. They came to us in 2004, and we raised via our crowdfunding platform, I'm sure you'll hear more of that soon, £5 million, which helped them really grow and become one of the most, I think, influential leaders in the fair trade movement over there, and continue to be a customer who we support very much so. And finally, I think, work in nature restoration. So this looks like a very nice part of Scotland, but it's UK generally is one of the most biodeplete countries on the planet. And even this lovely looking Scottish moor is actually very has been very depleted. And so we work with an organisation called Oxygen Conservation, who are trying to crack the model of making nature an asset class which is investable in. The thesis being that if you could get some of the people that we were talking about earlier in terms of the local pension funds and so on, to find a credible long-term model out the restoration of nature, it suddenly becomes a scalable thing. And with things like carbon credits and other government legislation, suddenly there may be a way of monetizing some of that work in terms of the restoration of peatland, of bogland, of tree planting, and so on. So we lent Oxygen, I think, £25 million a couple of years ago to support their journey to buy a big area of land in Inverkeldy in Scotland. So hopefully that gives you a flavour of the kind of things that we are working on. We're active both in terms of our own climate commitments, some of which you won't be able to read the small ones, but in terms of our own net zero target, which is a science-based target, which again, not very many of the other banks and so on have, or they've been rowing back on significantly in the last years. In terms of our targets, in terms of financing directly energy transition type of deals, we've made a public commitment to invest €500 million in nature restoration and climate in that area, and then a constant advocacy team that we have working in both government influence and also within the finance sector in terms of those things. I've just lost my notes because my machine's closed down. Just bear with me a sec. Yeah, where could you hear more? I have a few leaflets which I'll leave lying around, but if you are tech savvy, feel free to hit any of those QR codes, which gives you some of the thought leadership work we do, some of the detail of our impact investment reports, all of which you can find via our websites. Follow us on our socials, and of course, if there is any way that you want to, anything we can do to support you in your actual financial needs, then please feel free. Just, I guess, just to close, I guess, just to try and give you some sense of hope that the church can finance and fund the real economy that we are hoping to build, and that in that sense it has the missional desire to build communities, support the vulnerable, accelerate environmental restoration, and reflect the justice and compassion of the heart of the gospel. So hopefully our money can become part of our active ministry in that way. So thank you. Hand over.
Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me okay? Fantastic. First of all, I just want to say thank you for inviting me along here, and thank you to the Cathedral for hosting us here. This is a very, very cool place and a very cool room to be doing an event such as this in. I don't get organ music. I think that's reserved for the Quakers. So nothing for me, I'm afraid, but we shall make do. And this is the last presentation of today, so I assure you we will not be doing death by PowerPoint. There are only a few slides, and what I was asked to do is just to explain a little bit about Energise Africa and who we are and what we do, but then mostly to just give some examples of the work we do and the kind of things we fund and how we can actually make a difference. So as Chris alluded to earlier, Energise Africa was started by EthEx and another company in the Netherlands as a joint venture. EthEx, as you all now know, funds climate-positive projects in the UK. And I think they just thought that was too easy and kind of were getting bored and thought, how can we make our lives a bit more challenging and exciting? So they decided, what about sub-Saharan Africa? That'd be a good place to start doing this stuff. So Energise Africa was born as a direct investment platform to enable ordinary people to put money into climate-positive and very, very socially impactful projects in sub-Saharan Africa. And I know that today is all about climate, and it's about the climate challenge and about what we can do in order to, oh, I get bells. That's better. About what we can do to get our money to put our money to work to try and help to address the climate crisis by way of mitigation, adaptation, etc. But there are also real social changes that we can make at the same time. So we shouldn't be thinking that we can either put our money to work in a climate-positive way or in a socially responsible way. These things can really go hand in hand, and particularly when we're talking about developing economies, in our case, sub-Saharan Africa. The problem that we're trying to address, and every good organization starts with a problem, the problem that we're trying to address is really one that's quite a disgrace in the 21st century. There are 600 million people in Africa that do not have access to reliable energy. These are people who are using kerosene lamps, using candles to see by. These are people who are relying on diesel generators to create energy, very polluting, very noisy, very smelly, very horrible, because they don't have access to reliable electricity. And reliable electricity could mean access to the grid, but in many countries in Africa, the grid covers a very small proportion of the population. The vast majority of particularly rural areas are not connected and are not likely to be connected to the grid. But the solutions are there. We now know that solar power is a wonderful way to produce clean, reliable energy. So the solution is there for the 600 million people. And when we started Energise Africa, before I joined, about 8 years ago, the mission was the same. And when I joined about 2.5 years ago, I looked back over some of the original presentations, the original materials that Chris and colleagues had put together to talk about Energise Africa's mission. And it was about the number of people without access to clean energy. But 8 years ago, it was 580 million. Today, it's 600 million. The population without access to power is growing faster than we are addressing the problem. We are not even standing still. So we need solutions. We need to do something about this, and we need to accelerate the way in which we are giving people access to power. Lack of access to power holds everything back, and in particular, education. In most of the countries we operate in, it gets dark at 6 o'clock. It gets light at 6 o'clock in the morning and gets dark at 6 o'clock in the evening. I spent a lot of my childhood in Lagos, and then when my family went back to Dublin, the three things I was really taken aback by were the length of the days kept changing throughout the year, which I found very odd, having grown up in Lagos, very close to the equator. And the two other things I was taken aback by were the rain and the rain. So in most places we operate, it gets dark at 6 o'clock. Kids finish work, they come home, they can't read, they can't study. That is a problem that can be solved for a very, very small amount of money. Would you like to see how you solve the problem? I brought one with me. This is a solar lantern, this little thing here. This costs less than $10 to make. So less than £7.50 to manufacture and to deliver to Africa. This particular one is designed by Namane Solar, a guy called Patrick Lagrange in Nigeria, who designed this for the Nigerian market. It's a great little product. It has a solar panel there, and you leave this outside during the day, and then at 6 o'clock in the evening, you take this in, and you turn it on, and you have a desk light that somebody can read by, that a child can read by, that a child can do their homework by. It's also quite a clever design because it can hang on a nail on a wall, and there's a little gap on either side to put a head strap on, so it can actually operate as a head torch as well. Let me just pass that around. This is such a simple product, and it can change people's lives. And the people who need this, often our perception in Europe when we're talking about families in Africa, our perception is the problem is that they can't afford it. That, in the majority of cases, is not the problem. Affordability isn't the challenge. Access to capital is the challenge. If this is $10, there are very, very few families in many areas of rural Africa who can put their hands on $10, who can pull together $10 in one go. But what they can do is they can buy one of these and pay for it over 6 or 12 months. And this product will last 3 to 5 years, and it will give the children in that family a means of reading. It will give people in the family a means of carrying on working after the sun goes down. The problem for the buyers is access to capital. But again, that problem can be solved because there are fantastic entrepreneurs across many countries in Africa. That's a light from Nigeria. Nigeria has a lot of entrepreneurs. If anybody's ever been to Lagos, it is so entrepreneurial, it is exhausting. Sorry, This is the laptop telling me I'm talking too much on this slide. It's a technology telling me to get on with it. Thank you. So there are entrepreneurial companies in Africa who've developed models, pay-go models, energy-as-a-service models, so they can provide these products to families and they can pay them off over 12 months. But then those companies need access to capital because they need to buy tens of thousands of these in. It takes 2 months to manufacture. It takes about 3 months to deliver from China to Africa, another couple of weeks to get them to the right location. Then you get them out to your customers, and then your customers pay over 12 months. So these companies in Africa need access to capital. They need working capital for a couple of years so they can buy these products in and supply them to families on the terms that they can afford, the right products at the right terms. And that's where we come in. We provide debt funding to companies like Namane and like his customers so that they can provide these products to families on affordable terms. And that means that these rural communities don't get left behind. The children in the rural communities don't get left behind in terms of their education. People can carry on working, people can carry on studying after dark. That little thing that you're passing around there can change lives. And all that is really needed is that access to working capital. So what we do is we go and we find investment opportunities. Energise Africa has got an office in Oxford that we share with the guys at Ethics. And we have an office in Nairobi. And we have an investment team, and we go to lots of different countries in Africa, and we find these businesses that are supplying solar home systems, building mini-grids, doing all this wonderful stuff. And when we find the right ones, we list them on our platform. And then our investors, we have a community, not quite as big as Ethics' community, about 5,000 or 6,000 investors, but growing. And those investors can put money into these projects by subscribing for bonds for as little as £50. We deliberately and consciously wanted to make this a very open means of people investing impactfully. Going back to what you were saying about clean energy is seen as being net zero for middle classes, there's the same perception about impact investing, that you've got to have lots of money and you've got to be able to go to a big impact investment fund and in order to make a difference. What we're trying to say to people is you don't. If you've got as little as £50, you can invest in a company on the Energise Africa platform. That will fund 8 of those solar lanterns to go out to families in Nigeria, for example, and provide people with access to clean electricity. So we're trying to keep it accessible, and we're trying to keep it reasonable. Interest rates on our platform vary from about 6 to 8%. What we're trying to provide investors with, including institutional investors, of which there are a number on our site, is with a risk-adjusted return. The returns on Energise Africa are higher than the returns that you will get on some other investment platforms because the risks are higher. And the risks are not higher because of governance issues, because of fraud issues, because of the normal perceptions of risk in Africa. The risks are higher because we are lending to people in areas where it's difficult to do business. We've got a number of investees in the Congo, in DRC. There's an Ebola outbreak in Ituri province, which is next to Kivu province, where there's a war. And the border from Uganda is just closed to goods last week. These are challenging places to do business. So what we're trying to do is provide a risk-adjusted return where there is, we'll be the first to say it, these are more challenging places to do business, so the risks are higher. Equally, the returns that we provide are higher. The kind of projects we fund, what you're looking at, or what we just passed around there, is a solar lantern. That's kind of the entry-level product for getting access to clean energy. The next stage up from that will be a solar home system, which is a self-contained system that operates on one household. And that will include a solar panel, a battery, some electronics panels, and then you can plug appliances in and you will have power, generally speaking, not 24 hours, but you might have power anything from 18 to 20 hours a day. We also fund clean cooking, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. We think it's really important that we don't just look at solar and think about electricity when we're thinking about power. Most of the cooking in sub-Saharan Africa is done using charcoal, which is polluting, it's smelly, it's very unhealthy, and it leads to huge amounts of deforestation. And as many of you will know, deforestation has huge knock-on effects in terms of watercourses, in terms of soil retention, and then ultimately in terms of agricultural yields and people being able to feed their families and farmers being able to run sustainable businesses. We fund, not often, but we do fund some solar arrays on small businesses, for SMEs, so that they can employ people and they can reduce their costs of energy and they can become more viable. And we also fund electric vehicles. And again, I'll talk a bit more about the electric vehicles in a moment. It's important for a different reason than the solar lanterns, but there is an electric vehicle revolution happening in Africa at the moment. The way we choose the businesses to list, there are thousands of wonderful entrepreneurial energy access businesses in Africa. There are more EV motorbike businesses in the continent of Africa than there are motorbike businesses in the rest of the world. There are hundreds of them. So choosing the businesses that we fund is very, very important to us. We are impact-led and proudly and unashamedly impact-led. So we want to lend to businesses that will have a real impact, both environmental and social. We want to enable people to put their money to work to change and transform people's lives. We carry out extensive financial due diligence. The businesses that we list on the platform are operating in a different environment, but we do need to satisfy ourselves that they will be able to repay the debt. We do provide, it's debt funding, it's not philanthropy. So we carry out extensive due diligence in order to make sure that the business model will sustain the debt that we provide. And then we go and we visit the projects. We spend a lot of time, our team, in Africa, and every project that we fund, we will go and see, no matter where it is and no matter how difficult it is to get to, and some of them really are quite difficult to get to, the Congolese ones particularly. So we will go, we have boots on the ground, and we go and we meet the management teams. Visiting the projects and meeting the management teams is so important to us because it's a difficult area to do business. When we invest in a project in Africa, one of the things we can be sure of is that it will go wrong in some way, shape, or form. There will be a problem with the logistics, there'll be a problem with the supply, there'll be a problem with the climate, with the weather, or with the transport. There will be problems. What we try and do is meet management teams and back management teams that we believe can get around those problems and can surmount those problems and who can deliver the projects. And then we have ongoing risk management and ongoing monitoring of all of the companies we invest in. So they report to us every quarter, and we report to all of the bondholders. And we send them the news, and we've just sent out an email about the situation in Congo, because we've got 3 investee companies there. So we want our investors to know what they're doing and what we are helping them to do to get over the challenges at the moment, and what they're going to do in order to make sure they deliver on the projects so they can repay the money. I won't go into lots of statistics. I just want to just very quickly run through these. Since Energise Africa has been operating in the last 8 years, 1.12 million people now have access to clean energy. And that is the statistic that our team are most proud of. In the context of 600 million people, it may not seem like a lot. In the context of those 1 million people, it's a huge difference. And that's what we need to focus on. We have funded projects that have avoided nearly 750,000 kilos, tons, not kilos, apologies, of CO2 from entering the atmosphere. And that's really important to us. We are very thorough in the way that we measure this, so we know when we're funding a project, whether we're replacing kerosene lanterns, whether we're replacing diesel gensets. And we'll look at, if it's EVs, for example, we will look at the grid mix in the country. So funding EVs in Kenya is very, very environmentally impactful because the grid in Kenya is 90% renewable. So shifting people from petrol to EVs is very important. The amount raised is now 48.9. We are closing in on our 50 million benchmark of the amount of funds raised. And we're growing. Like FX, the amount we raised on the platform grew by over 40% last year, and we're expecting to grow by about another 50% this year. So the business is growing and moving. And one of the things I was asked to do today is just to quickly talk through some examples of things that we've funded. And I just want to quickly run through three. The first one is One Power in Benin. One Power is a company that's based in Lesotho, which is a landlocked country surrounded by South Africa. Wonderful place. And the One Power team have developed expertise in Lesotho, and they're now building mini-grids in Benin, and they're just about to start building mini-grids in Zambia. For those of you who don't know what a mini-grid is, it's a solar array that is coupled with the battery storage and all of the means to deliver the power. So you can build a mini-grid, a green mini-grid, in a remote village, put in solar panels, racks, batteries, inverters, cabling, usually low or medium-low voltage, and deliver power to everybody within that village or number of villages. Mini-grids are vital for delivering good quality electricity to Africa, and a mini-grid can not only enable people to get access to light and to charge phones and power radios, but will give people AC power so that they can power fridges, they can power milling machines, and they can make a huge difference to their lives. 3 weeks ago, I was with the guys at One Power at a new site that they're building. And in this village, there was a small blue building with some racks in front of it that had no solar panels on it. And it was a failed project, a failed previous attempt to bring power to this village. But inside this building, there were 3 hammer mills for wheat, but they couldn't be used. And the people in this village were telling us that every time they harvest wheat, they send it into the town for milling, and then they get back 70% of it, because 30% is the cost of milling. So just putting in the mini-grid and enabling them to connect up those mills is going to very dramatically increase the agricultural output of that village. So it's not just about the power, the quality of life, it's also about making people's lives sustainable in the face of climate change and in the face of other challenges that are impacting on rural communities in Africa right now. Second one I want to talk about is EcoSafi. I love this business, they're great. They're currently operating in Kenya, they're about to open in Zambia, and then they'll be opening in Uganda. And they provide these cook stoves. These are clean cook stoves. So in Kenya, most people in rural environments cook on charcoal, which means deforestation, it means pollution, and it means huge amounts of soil erosion because of the loss of trees. EcoSafi build these very advanced clean cook stoves. These cost about $92 landed each when they come in. They're very technologically advanced. They've got 2 fans. They can be hardware updated remotely to operate efficiently at different altitudes. So this is an advanced piece of kit. EcoSafi give these stoves away to people. They open up in a village, and then they give everybody in the village one of these stoves. And then through church groups in Kenya, they identify in the village a woman to act as their representative, who will represent EcoSafi within that village, and they will be supplied with the pellet fuel. And in Kenya, the pellet fuel comes from sugarcane bagasse, which is waste product from sugar production. And there are hundreds of millions of tons of sugarcane bagasse in Kenya to be used. EcoSafi have a means of manufacturing the pellet fuel. They can sell the pellet fuel to the families for 40% less than charcoal, while eliminating the deforestation and while eliminating the harmful emissions from the charcoal cook stoves. The cook stoves are then paid for by Article 6 carbon credits. So this is an example of the Paris Accord actually working. So the emissions, it's Spain and Sweden that are buying the carbon credits from these cook stoves, and they are funding, because of emissions in Europe, they're funding high-quality clean cook stoves to go into families in Kenya. EcoSafi then make their money from the manufacture and the sale of the pellets, and because that's their business imperative, every time a stove goes wrong, they fix it for free, because otherwise that person isn't buying the pellets. And that means far less electronic waste. It means that the stoves are maintained, and it means that there's a commercial imperative to keep these working and to keep engaging with the community. And the last one I wanted to talk about, which is again live on the site at the moment, is Mask. Mask is an engineering company based in Bauchi in northern Nigeria. It's been operating for about 30 years. The CEO at the moment is the son of the founder. This guy here, that's the current CEO, Kaim Mahmood. I have no idea what he's looking at. It's obviously fascinating, and it's obviously up there somewhere. Don't know what it is, though. Kaim took over a very successful engineering company from his father. But he didn't want to just keep making money and making engineering projects. He's an electrical engineer by training. But he's also a very, very devout man. He did a webinar on for our investors a couple of weeks ago, and he was dialing in from Saudi Arabia, where he had just completed his Hajj. He wanted the business to do good. And it was his Muslim faith that led him to change the direction of Mask engineering and to start developing and building mini-grids. And we're now funding them alongside a number of other organizations to build 19 mini-grids in Bauchi province in northern Nigeria. And that will bring clean energy to 67,000 people in some of the poorest areas of Nigeria. And I just wanted to finish on a real-world example rather than talking about the projects and the companies that we fund. This is a lady I met a couple of years ago called Patience. And Patience runs a shop. It's a small business, a micro SME, whatever you want to call it. It's a little shop. And she was supplied by one of our investees, Aptec, with what is essentially a solar home system. There's a couple of solar panels on the roof of the shop, some cabling, and a couple of batteries. This is not a very highly technological solution, but the additional revenue that she gets from having the solar power in the shop and being able to sell cold drinks and being able to sell fresh produce and having far less wastage on fresh produce has enabled her to generate far more revenue, more than enough to pay off the cost of the solar panel and the solar kit. So come back to the point that I made at the beginning, that this isn't about affordability. Patience can afford access to clean power. What Patience wasn't able to afford is to pay for it right now up front. So what is needed in sub-Saharan Africa, what's needed in these developing economies, is not always. Sometimes we do need philanthropy, and there is definitely a place for it. But it isn't always philanthropy that people need. It's not always charity that people need. What they need is access to capital. And what we have in the Western world is a vast, vast amount of capital. So what we at Energise Africa would like to ask everybody in this room to do, and would like to ask you to ask everybody you know to do, is to take some of that capital that you have available and put it to work where it's really needed and where it can actually change people's lives on the ground. Thank you for listening. I'd love to hear any questions you have.